A very good afternoon and welcome everybody to today's webinar. Welcome to the IFZA headquarters here in Dubai Silicon Oasis. Very happy to see that we have so many people who already dialed into today's webinar. I've just got the latest number. We have over 170 participants already so far from over 20 countries. So I say good afternoon to the ones who are in the UAE, of course, and maybe good morning and good evenings to everyone around the world. Thank you so much for joining today. It's a pleasure to host this webinar today with this exciting topic that we're going to talk about, navigating influencer law in the UAE. The influencer topic is obviously a very hot topic here in the country. So we will talk about how to give you some compliance tips when it comes to your business and obviously also the content. I'm actually very happy that I'm not here by myself today, but I have two fantastic experts on the topic with me that I would like to quickly introduce. On the one hand, we have Dr. Constantin Frank-Fahle, lawyer and founding partner of emltc. Constantin, welcome and thank you so much for being here. And then on the other hand, we have Andreas Heinrich, lawyer and tax advisor at emltc, also here with us today. So two real experts on the topic who will guide you through those different conversations and make sure to give you all the necessary information. I want to give a special thanks to the German AHK here in the UAE, who together with us organized and facilitated that webinar. So thank you for that. IFZA has actually created a wide range of different webinars in recent months, and we collaborated often with the AHK. So we're very happy and grateful for that. So also a special welcome to our colleagues from Germany who are also participating today. My name is Diego Michel. I am the Director International Business Relations here in IFZA. So we are taking care of the international markets and clients who are coming to Dubai and are interested in setting up an entity together with IFZA. And I'm also the host of today's webinar. Before we jump in the topic and the conversation, I would like to give you a couple of housekeeping rules. On the one hand, the very good news is the webinar is going to be recorded, and you will get the recording as well as the slides later on sent to you. So please feel free to sit back and relax as you get all the necessary information and the content sent to you afterwards. Secondly, we will have a time for a Q&A session towards the end of the webinar. So on your screen, you will see the possibility to type in questions. So please feel free throughout the webinar to add your questions and comments that you would like to have discussed together with the experts later on after the presentations. So without further ado, I would like to kick it off, and I would like to give the word to you, Constantin. Please go ahead and give us the insights on your end.
Yeah, thank you very much for hosting us, Diego. It's a great pleasure to be here. Thanks also to the AHK for being part of this event. My name is Constantin Frank-Fahle. I'm one of the founding partners of emltc. Today we're going to talk about influencer laws with a strong focus on licensing issues, but also on taxation. Before we jump into the topic, I'm just going to give you a quick overview of what we do at emltc. We're an integrated law and tax consultancy firm with a strong focus on the C-suite, but also the legal and tax departments. We do have quite some influencers in our client portfolio, which is why we identified this topic that we're talking about today together with IFZA and AHK and thought that it would make sense. We act typically for regional headquarters and help our clients to implement growth strategies and typically act as a so-called one-stop service provider, whereas we tackle legal and taxation issues from one end. So that's what we do. Today, we will talk about the influencer laws in the UAE. I'll take over the introduction, that's point one, and the legal framework regarding the governing laws, the licensing requirements, and so forth. Andreas will talk later on and will introduce himself later on when I will hand over to him about the taxation aspects, just a general overview about the UAE tax system, and in particular the corporate income tax and value-added tax issues. And then I'll take over to give you an overview about the tax considerations you should have when you would like to relocate to the UAE. And I will also give you an outlook and conclusion. As Diego had mentioned earlier, please feel free to type in your questions and answers. Hopefully some of those questions might be already covered throughout the slides and the presentations Andreas and I will hold. If not, we are more than happy to address these questions later on in the Q&A session. So let's jump right into it. What is happening? So social media influencers are really shaping consumer trends and decision-making processes in the most recent history through so-called brand promotion. And we've seen that the United Arab Emirates has somewhat evolved to a hub for influencers and digital nomads. For various reasons, obviously, one of them being that the country has a fantastic infrastructure, but obviously also for taxation reasons. Until most recently, there was no corporate income tax. We will discuss this in detail. But there's also sort of this growing influence of social media influencers. And there we have sort of some developments on the regulatory end, which basically pertains to consumer protection, economic regulation, but also cultural sensitivity. The UAE being a Islam sort of country, a Muslim country, there are certain rules and regulations that you would need to keep in mind when you post here and try to target an audience in the UAE. As I've mentioned, we have the corporate income tax, which came into place in June 2023, which has an impact on the social media influencers. And then we have a growing regulatory framework, and we will discuss this in the upcoming slides. So now I'm going to address the legal framework for influencers in the United Arab Emirates. One of the most interesting aspects for me is, as a lawyer, to understand which laws and regulations actually are applicable to influencers. One of them is the media regulation and the respective implementing regulations. These are basically dealing with people who apply to individuals and businesses that are engaged in advertising on social media. So you need to pay attention to these pieces of law. They also cover both paid and unpaid advertising, and I think this is very important also in the entire context of this presentation, but also your business activities. You might have regulatory obligations also in case you are influencing and you are not getting paid for it, meaning you are not raising any invoices to business partners, or you might receive some other benefits. All of this might be applicable, so please listen carefully, also if you are not basically being paid in cash or in kind. We then also have the so-called cybercrime law, and most recently also from 2023, the anti-discrimination and hatred and extremism law, whereby you should keep in mind what you post, in particular the content you post, which can have hefty fines and penalties. Discuss that as we go along. So I think the initial sort of thoughts that somebody has when they think about setting up their company or their business in the UAE is, where do I set up and how do I sort of get the shows up and running? There's basically two aspects. The one aspect is you would need to obtain a so-called trade or freelance license. For companies, that is the so-called trade license. This could be in one of the various free zones, such as IFZA, but also obviously in the mainland of the 7 Emirates. For individuals, it's a bit different. They can obtain a freelance license in some of the free zones, but also in the mainland. But as a second step, and that's sort of something that was introduced earlier this year, you would also have to apply for a National Media Council license. This is for companies around 5,000 dirhams annually, whereas for individuals, they have waived the fees for the first 3 years, and it would be 1,000 dirhams from the 4th year. The reasoning and the logic behind this is basically that the NMC wants as many as people to register with the NMC in order to sort of monitor the social media activities. And that's why they basically waived the fees for individuals, sort of keeping in mind that not every influencer will be, let's say, super successful, maybe not in the beginning because they're scaling up their business. But for you guys sort of to take away, you need to understand you would need to have a trade license or a commercial license, as it's also referred to as. with the respective correct commercial activity. Some people start off, that's what we've seen in practice, with a general, like a management consultancy license, which is not the correct activity. You would need to go for something called social media influencer, or for instance, if you're a blogger, for the blogger activity, the correct sort of naming or title of the respective activity may vary from free zone to mainland, but more or less this is something you need to check. And then please keep in mind that you would need to apply with the NMC. It's typically a quite straightforward process whereby you would need to submit a passport photo of yourself and hand in information that pertains to conduct your social media activities, such as through Instagram or Facebook. And then you would also need to submit respective websites that you are posting your activities through. In addition, you might need to fill in another form, and this is all for the purposes of the NMC to really understand what you're doing and being able sort of to trace back whoever is acting as a social media influencer. Other than that, obviously, the general sort of question always arises, what legal form do you take? Do you take a company, a free zone company, or a limited liability company in the mainland? I think the idea is really just to understand that these types of companies are typically limited in liability as far as the capital has been fully paid up. So other than in other jurisdictions in the UAE, you can relatively easily incorporate a company, in particular in the free zones, and they don't require you to pay up the capital in the bank account. They will issue the license and the company will be existent, but the limitation of liability will typically only sort of take place once the capital has been paid up by the shareholder. You, other than that, have the possibility also to go for a sole establishment or a proprietorship or a freelance. The main differences to a limited liability company or a free zone company is that these legal forms are not limited in liability, meaning that if you have a contractual partner, for instance, that is going to sue you for, let's say, be liable with your personal wealth, whereas for the company would be limited to its assets, and there is sort of a ring fence between the company's assets and your own assets. Other than that, I think you always need to keep in mind that the UAE has certain residency visa / work permit requirements. For anybody who wants to work in the UAE, they would need to have the respective employment visa or work permit, which is typically included in the residency visa. Now, we have some special forms of visa nowadays, in particular if you are trying to or planning to relocate. Allow you to carry out any work. So it's very important to see how you are actually going to conduct the respective works that you're carrying out in the UAE. And need the company actually incorporate. Other than that, I think this I covered already. Social media conduct. I think it's very important, again, to get back to the cybercrime law, but also the anti-discrimination, hatred and extremism law, that you really understand that you cannot say anything on social media. Again, the country being a Muslim country, there's certain restrictions on, let's say, advertising alcohol products, but also tobacco products. So if that's something you have in mind, going together with one of the big alcohol producing countries, then you would need to really consider whether you would want to do that, because there might be legal consequences under the aforementioned laws. The same sort of pertains to vague and misleading or false advertisements, because we have some sort of consumer protection in the UAE, but the same also sort of applies to religious aspects, such as having disrespectful statements against Islam, but also the UAE government. So in all of that, you also would need to respect the privacy rules and related sort of to the private lives of individuals that can pertain to taking pictures and posting pictures of people that actually never gave their consent. We had a client most recently that basically was very unhappy with their fit out of the company that was fitting out the office. They posted a video of the office and used it basically on Instagram to advertise that. That would be very problematic without the consent actually of their client. So really be careful and think twice of what you post and who you include in the posts, such as other people that have nothing to do with the photo you are trying to take. And it goes on to basically also not spreading any rumors or misleading news or violating intellectual property rights of others. Also keep in mind you might need prior approval from other relevant authorities. This really depends on the product you're trying to place. And yeah, you would, and this is also very important, somehow clearly disclose that you are receiving a financial gain. Let's say if you include a link to a funnel that basically then allows the respective potential customer to sign on for something and you will receive a commission, you would actually need to disclose this. From what we have monitored and what we've seen with clients, this is one of the most crucial points that is again and again not being complied with. Other than that, penalties through the media regulations, you might receive a warning if something happens, but the law also says that they can give you an administrative fine between 1,000 and 1 million dirhams. They might even double that in case of a repeated offense, but they might also close down your business for up to 6 months, or in the worst case scenario, cancel your trade license, the permits, and any other approvals that were basically taken. In addition to that, please again keep in mind the cybercrime law and the anti-discrimination, hatred, and extremism law. The NMC has, as far as we have checked and discussed with them, not launched any social sort of media advertising penalties yet. As I've mentioned earlier, all of this came into force earlier this year, around I think April, May. So all of this is relatively new. What we've seen in Abu Dhabi is that the Abu Dhabi Department of Economic Development has issued a circular regarding social media advertising, and they say that you need an ADDED license to work as an influencer in social media advertiser or influencer in the Emirate of Abu Dhabi. And they have also issued in that circular penalties from 3,000 to 10,000 dirham in case you do not have the respective licenses. So in a nutshell, I think it's important to understand that this is all of a bit of a moving target. There's a lot of new regulations coming out. And if you are active as a social media influencer, make yourselves familiar with the laws we just discussed on the one hand, but also please monitor sort of the developments, because we think there will be much more regulations coming in place. With this, I'd like to hand over to my colleague Andreas. He will introduce himself and take over the taxation part, which is, in my view, also an extremely important aspect, because as we've seen, a lot of the transactions that you will take out as or carry out as an influencer, sometimes you will not know whether it is subject to VAT and what your sort of corporate income tax liability is. Andreas.
Thank you very much, and thank you also from my side to have the opportunity to speak at this webinar. My name is Andreas Heinrich. I'm a lawyer and tax advisor at emltc, specializing in taxes on the one hand, but also on dispute resolution matters, also in court case proceedings and arbitration in particular. The latter shall not interest us today. We're here for the topic of taxation in the UAE, and I would like to give you a brief or relatively brief overview of the tax system that we have here in the UAE, the two main tax laws that there are, and the two main taxation types of taxes that we know in the UAE. On the one hand, there is the VAT law, which has been introduced in 2018. And on the other hand, we have the corporate income tax law, which was just introduced relatively recently, became into force in June of last year. So also in that regard, everything from a tax perspective is relatively new. That means, though, that unlike it used to be, and the UAE may still be known in some areas of the world, it is no longer a completely tax-free destination. Nevertheless, the tax rates that are charged here are still relatively low. The corporate income tax rate is only at 9%. If you compare that, for instance, with Germany, there the corporate income tax rate is 15%. The overall tax burden is roughly 30% even. So there you can see the differences in the burden of taxation that you have here. That is still quite low. The same applies for the value-added tax, which is only at 5%, which in comparison to other jurisdictions is also extremely low. What still is tax-free in the very sense of the word are wages and salaries. So whenever you're conducting a business on your own or you're running a company, that the income that you're generating there, that is taxed. And if you're employed with somebody else and you're earning a salary, that salary still is completely tax-free in this country. Also, this applies to personal investments, such as if you do some stock investing and earn some money there, then that is also generally free of tax, as well as real estate investment income. Let's start with the corporate tax, or the corporate income tax rather. The corporate income tax only then applies when you're a tax resident in the UAE, or if you're having business in the UAE and you're making money inside of the UAE. When you're a tax resident of the UAE, then your worldwide income will be taxed. So if, for instance, if you're a resident here, but you have some income abroad, that income will also be subject to taxation here in the UAE. Of course, there are quite a number of so-called double taxation agreements between the UAE and different countries of the world. Not with Germany though, and which would then kind of resolve this problem for you. But generally speaking, worldwide income that you generate is taxable here when you're a resident here. If you're not a resident here, but you generate income here, then the income that you're generating here in the UAE, that is also subject to corporate income tax. So the decisive question at the end of the day is, who is a resident and how do you become a resident in the UAE? What determines whether or not you are a resident here? For companies, that is quite straightforward. Whether if the company is incorporated here, so for instance, if it's an IFZA free zone a company, then it is quite clear that this company is a resident here in the UAE and fully taxable here. The same applies also to other establishments which are recognized here in the UAE. And that's also speciality. If that company, if the company is not a resident here, or wasn't founded here, let's put it like that. So, for instance, if you have a company that was incorporated in Germany, to stay with that example, and you move to the UAE, but you keep your company in Germany, you manage it from here. That company is then managed here, but still earning income in Germany. That company will become a tax resident inside of the UAE because it is effectively managed from the UAE. At the same time, since it's still a German company, the German state will say that this is a German company and consider it a German resident, and therefore also be fully tax liable in Germany. And this can lead to the risk of double taxation, which I've just mentioned earlier also. So whenever you already started a business abroad and you want to move to the UAE, then you have to bear in mind what you're going to do with the business that you've been running until you've decided to come here. For individuals, it's a little bit more complex to determine whether or not you're actually a resident in the United Arab Emirates or not. If you are a full resident here, if you have your center of life here, you stay here all year round roughly, then of course you are a tax resident here in the UAE. That is the easy part. If you stay more than 182 days a year here, but less than the full year, then you're also considered to be a tax resident in the UAE. If you stay less than that, so less than half a year during a full year's term, but more than 90 days, you might also be considered a tax resident in the United Arab Emirates if certain additional factors apply to you as well. That goes for whether or not you're in case you're a UAE national or a national of the GCC countries. That also applies to people who have a Emirates ID, your resident ID here, even though you might not be fully living here. And that also requires for you, that's a third requirement, to have, for instance, a job here. So if all of these three factors apply, even though you only stay here roughly 90 days or a little bit longer during a year, then you're still considered a tax resident in the UAE. If one of these factors does not apply, then you're not a tax resident in the UAE. So then your income will not be charged, is not be subject to the UAE taxes unless you're making money here within the UAE. Let's talk a little bit about reliefs, thresholds, and the scope. Generally, when you conduct business here in the UAE, you need to register for the corporate tax with the Federal Tax Authority, the FTA. There's no threshold for that. So basically the day you start your business, there's some time limits there, but other than that, basically the day you start your business, irrespective of you're making any money or if you're actually making losses, you need to register for the corporate tax. But you do not have to pay taxes on the first 375,000 dirhams that you're of profit that you're making. On that, the tax rate is 0%. If you're making 1 dirham more, the 9% tax rate applies, but only to that 1 dirham that you're making more than 375,000. That goes generally for companies. There's a small business relief, which startup entities, for instance, can apply for, which basically relieve you of the obligation to pay any taxes, as long as you're making revenues of less than 3 million dirhams. That is irrespective of profit. So if you're making revenues of 3 million dirhams and don't have any costs, meaning that you're also making 3 million dirhams, which is rather not very often the case, but theoretically possible, then you can make actually 3 million dirhams in profits without having to pay taxes on that. For individuals, this all goes for companies. For individuals, or for instance, if you're a freelance influencer or content creator, which would most likely be the case, then you're only taxed when your annual revenues are over 1 million dirhams. So there is quite some space there in order to start up your business here without having the additional tax burden. That shall be it in a nutshell for the corporate and income tax part of this webinar. Let's now talk a little bit about the VAT aspects, which are somewhat more complicated and may be more relevant for many of you listening out there today. The VAT is a value-added tax, which is not levied on the profit that you're making, but on the transactions that you're doing. So every time you make a transaction, meaning you're supplying goods or a service, most of you will probably supply a service, and you're receiving a compensation for that, then this is a transaction which in general at least is subject to VAT. The VAT rate is 5%, as I already mentioned, which is quite low compared to other international standards. The VAT system works quite simple, actually. When you, let's say that you're promoting a UAE cosmetic brand, that pays you 10,000 dirhams for a number of posts during a month. And then you're required to issue an invoice for that because you're conducting a business. That invoice of 10,000 dirhams has to be added 5% on top of that. So the invoice amount will then be 10,500. Of these 10,500, 10,000 you can keep for your business, 500 you will have to pay forward basically to the Federal Tax Authority. On the other hand, if you have to purchase goods or services in order to conduct your business, then you often always have to pay, I have to pay the 5% VAT. These 5% VAT you then can also deduct, or rather claim back from the FTA. So that kind of makes your purchases a little cheaper. However, this only goes for purchases that you make or services that you receive, which have a relation to the business that you're conducting. So that only if you're conducting a business, but purchase something privately, which you're not using for the business, then you of course cannot claim back the 5% VAT that you paid on that. So like I said, the VAT, the VAT is triggered upon a taxable transaction. Like I said, that happens when you provide something to somebody, like a service or a good, and receive a compensation for that. That compensation is usually money, but does not necessarily have to be money. It can also be a barter or an exchange. So for instance, if you have a deal with a beauty brand on Instagram, for instance, when you post a number of posts there and receive some free goods from that brand, which is meant as a way of compensating you for that, then the value of these goods that you receive, for instance, a makeup kit or whatever, that actually is considered compensation on which value-added tax has to be added to. So this, of course, does not apply to gifts that you receive without having provided a service in return. So it is important to know what kind of transaction is subject to VAT and what kind of transaction is not subject to VAT. That is a tricky part. In the UAE VAT law, there is a special regulation pertaining to what's called electronic services. These electronic services are transactions where you're providing a pre-recorded video, for instance, that you're posting on the internet without any human interaction therewith, and you receive income for that. In that case, it's considered an electronic service. Then the place of use and enjoyment, as you would call it, determines whether or not this transaction is actually taxable under the UAE VAT law or not. Only when the viewer of that video is located in the UAE is that transaction considered a taxable transaction under the UAE VAT law. If the viewer of the video is outside of the UAE, which in many instances may be the case, then this transaction is not even a taxable transaction. So it's no transaction that you have to record or report to the FTA, and you cannot charge VAT on top of that if the viewer is outside of the UAE. If you're providing other services where there's human interaction, then all services that you provide are generally subject to the VAT, but not all of them are then charged at 5%. Like I said, it is quite tricky. In order for you to demonstrate it a little bit more clear, I've brought you a number of examples in order to clarify the situation a bit more. So let's say Mr. A is a resident in the UAE and he's selling online courses to students worldwide, including of the UAE. The courses contain on-demand pre-recorded videos or pictures and any online course material that is already pre-prepared. There's no human interaction. There's no Zoom calls or anything. These are what you would call electronic services. Only students who are located in the UAE and are watching these videos and enjoying the course in the UAE would be subject to VAT. If students are outside of the outside of the UAE, then there is no. It's not subject to the VAT. Students who are within the UAE then have to pay the 5% VAT on top of the invoice. So if you're outside the UAE, it'll be 5% cheaper. Let's change this example a little bit. Mr. A now, in example 2, is providing interactive online courses on Zoom, so where you have actual human interaction, and it's like a classroom, for instance, and the electronic communication means are only a means of communication, not the product itself. In that case, it's not an electronic service, and all transactions are subject to VAT. However, there's a difference. Students who are outside of the UAE will be subject to 0% VAT, because this is what's considered an export of service outside of the UAE. If students are located inside the UAE, it's a service that you provide inside of the UAE, and therefore the 5% VAT is levied. What I'm trying to say here is it is very important for you as influencers or content creators to know first what type of transaction am I providing, what type of service. Is it an electronic service or is it an actual service? And secondly, where are my customers located? Where is my customer located? Note, please, that your followers are not necessarily your customers. This goes a bit hand in hand with example 3. Ms. B is a resident in Dubai and has a contract with a famous French fashion brand to promote its bags. For that, she's paid 5,000 dirhams for posts in promoting these bags to her followers. She's writing scripts and adding photos and videos and doing everything pre-recorded to her followers. The question now is this an electronic service or not? You'll have to ask yourselves, who is my customer and who am I providing that service to? Am I providing that service to my followers or to that French fashion brand? Obviously, it's the French fashion brand, which would then mean that it's not an electronic service, but an actual transaction, because the service that you're providing is to that French brand and not the types of not the videos that you're actually posting. However, since that French brand is located outside of the UAE, 0% taxable applies. Let's change that a little bit. In example 4, you have a Ms. B, which provides affiliate marketing services to Chanel, also a French fashion brand. She posts online to her followers, and her followers can access the sales site of that French brand through a link that is in her bio on Instagram, for instance. Through that link, if you access that, the purchaser will then get a 10% discount, and Ms. B receives a 5% commission on that. Obviously, again, here, her customer is that French brand and not the follower. But here, it's an electronic service that's being provided, because it's the transaction is done through that electronic link and not through any kind of human interaction. The service that's being provided to that French brand is making the connection, and that's electronically and not by human interaction. Therefore, it's not a transaction which is subject to VAT. Here, there's a little overview for you to consult in case you would like to know a little bit more and are not certain in terms of certain transactions that you're conducting, and you can consult that after the webinar when we have circulated the slides. Let's talk, to sum up, a little bit about compliance requirements. Like I said, you need, if you're a CT for your corporate tax registration, you need to register immediately. There are certain timelines that depend on certain factors that you have to keep in mind. If you have incorporated your company very recently or are going to do so in the future, then generally you have roughly 3 months' time in order to register with the FTA. If you have a company which has existed already prior to that, then there is until the end of the year certain time limits that you need to observe until until you get a fine if you don't do so. With a VAT requirement, you need with the VAT. You also have to register with the FTA, but only, unlike the corporate tax, if you make a turnover of more than 375,000 dirhams. This concludes my hopefully not too long presentation on the corporate tax and VAT in the UAE, and I hand over to my colleague Constantin to conclude. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Andreas, for guiding us through the examples. I think you illustrated very well the complexities, in particular regarding VAT. To sum it up, I think all of you would really need to understand the complexity of transactions, understanding whether the services that you are providing are subject to VAT. When you need to register, there is the 375,000 dirham threshold, obviously, and then understanding what type of service you actually render, and in particular, who's your customer and where are they located.
Exactly.
I think just to add one aspect that we did not mention, that's the aspect of also obtaining the tax registration number of your corporate clients, in particular in the UAE. You will always need to issue a tax compliant tax invoice, and that if it is a customer that is registered in the United Arab Emirates would necessitate that you mention the TRN, the tax registration number. So to sum it up, I think from a tax perspective, and I think I would like to go back basically a couple of steps. A big question is always, if you are abroad and you are thinking about moving your business or starting your business in the UAE, you would always need to keep in mind the tax regulations in your home country, particularly then when you already have a business up and running. Here we see that the so-called exit taxation can cause a very big burden on the transition of your business into the United Arab Emirates, for instance, and you could entail significant financial risks if you're not knowing what you're doing, and you might need to pay for that sort of taxation. The exit tax is not applicable everywhere, so you would really need to check depending on where you are from and if you want to shift that business into the UAE, whether it is applicable. We can only say consult with a local tax advisor before basically making any moves to understand your liabilities. Otherwise, this can be a quite expensive move you can make, and it definitely goes against your cash flow. Obviously, us being also qualified German lawyers, and Andreas in particular being a qualified German tax advisor, we know when it comes to the German exit taxation, but we do know that other jurisdictions also have exit tax rules, or such as in the USA, where they basically pinpoint the tax liability to your citizenship. That also has other implications on your movability, so to speak, of the business. Other than that, I think there's a lot of overall advantages of moving the business to the UAE, in particular when we basically benchmark the corporate tax regime against similar tax regimes elsewhere, be it in the Western Hemisphere, but also in emerging markets where we typically have very high corporate tax rates. If we think about subcontinent, where we're roughly also talking about tax burdens between 30 to 40%, then obviously VAT you need to keep in mind, which is, if you run a business, obviously just sort of a pass-through that is not impacting the business in the sense, in the big cash flow sense, but you need to be compliant. You need to understand the system. That's what we discussed earlier. And then I think the accounting schemes and calculation of that are quite straightforward at the moment in the UAE. And what we also see, compare it with other states, in particular in the Arab Gulf countries, the FTA, the Federal Tax Authority, does have a quite good reputation and knows what they're doing. They have issued various amount of documents on their website for public sort of clarification and guides, where you can basically familiarize yourself with the respective rules and regulations, also with examples similar to what Andreas just presented to you. The treaty network for the so-called double taxation agreements is quite dense, but notably neither the US nor Germany have an active double taxation agreement with the UAE. I'm not sure about the status with Germany. I've been told that there are rumors that they're renegotiating this, but there's nothing clear out there yet. But also take a look at that in case you have situations where your place of effective management potentially lies outside of the country, outside of the UAE, or you are still basically working through your old entity in your, let's say, home jurisdiction, but you have basically de facto shifted already through a different type of visa to the UAE, and thereby you have a tax liability for that company, the foreign company in the UAE. And keep in mind the exemptions Andreas just discussed for a corporate, from a corporate income tax perspective. There are other ways basically to get a 0% tax regime, but this is not applicable for influencers because these respective services that you would render are not covered as so-called qualifying activities. That's also in a nutshell why we didn't discuss this today. That's why we did not touch upon this aspect. Other than that, wrong direction. To conclude and give you an outlook, I think definitely the market has evolved. I mean, there was a huge influx shortly after the Corona crisis, where also the government has had some contracts with influencers, in particular to promote the Emirate of Abu Dhabi and Dubai to become, you know, a place that shows that they have reacted very well to the Corona crisis, have opened up maybe quicker than other countries. This is particularly true to the Emirate of Dubai. And we have seen that with that influx, obviously, of influencers, there is a growing regulatory landscape. In terms of the organization, keep in mind what kind of sort of corporate setup you are aiming at. Are you going into a free zone, such as IFZA? Are you opting for the mainland, which basically comes along with other options if you would like to rent out office space and, you know, have a team of people that you would like to employ? Are you going for a limited liability company versus a freelance visa? What kind of business activities do you need to apply for? I had mentioned to you that we've seen in practice individuals setting up their companies and actually opting for the wrong business license or the wrong business activity, such as management consultancies, because they either don't really know what they're aiming at or they have been advised to do so, and that advice is simply wrong. So please keep in mind, you need to go for a social sort of media influencer, or if you're a blogger sort of license. The concrete sort of names may vary from free zone to free zone or the mainland to mainland. And then, as I've mentioned and explained earlier, please keep in mind the NMC license. This is applicable both to the companies, but also if you're carrying out such services as a freelancer. And I think this point is very important. It is completely unimportant whether you generate profits through your social media activities for the purposes of the NMC license. You will need to do so in any case. 5,000 dirhams per year for companies, the first 3 years free of charge for individuals and freelancers, and then thereafter, starting from your fourth, 1,000 dirhams. Apart from that, check out your visa and work permit sort of situation. Keep in mind, if you have invested into real estate or you are otherwise eligible for a so-called golden visa, you would still need to apply for a work permit through the respective body where you have incorporated your company or applied for your freelance visa with. And then again, content, be transparent with paid advertisement. I've mentioned that this is one aspect that we see that typically a lot of people simply ignore because maybe they also don't want to be so transparent on how they earn their money, but it is a requirement. Be sensitive in the terms of the cultural surroundings you are living and working in, but also the political surroundings. it is important not to post anything against the UAE government and so forth. And I respect the rights of others. In particular, I've made that example with photos and other ways that you would include others that actually do not want to be part of your social media campaign. Taxation, as we said, you need to always register for corporate income tax if you carry out business activities in the UAE. 3 months deadline for new licenses, and there is a obligation for you to register for VAT above the threshold of 375,000 dirhams, certain documentation requirements to go through that process, and then you have different VAT implications which depend on the types of services you provide to your customers, but also the location of your customers. So you need to put in place a system how you identify that to be VAT compliant, meaning you could have an IP sort of location aspect, or you just get the address out of the sort of booking system that you use, and then you would need to issue VAT compliant tax invoices to your customers. In our view, obviously, UAE continues to be an extremely attractive location for influencers and content creators. We see, as I've mentioned a couple of times now, and I'd like to make this point again because it's very important, an increase in the regulations, and we'll see more requirements, compliance requirements coming up for this specific industry, but also you would need to monitor these new regulations, and you would need to sort of get yourself familiar with the old regulations. Potentially, you will also need some guidance. Obviously, UAE has a very stable political framework. We have a young and international workforce, in particular when you want to upscale sort of your media presence, modern technology, good infrastructure, and free zones such as IFZA can provide great support when setting up your business. And apart from that, low taxes and a relatively simple tax regime. I think if you speak to people from Germany or from subcontinent, from India, everybody would agree on that the taxation system we have, albeit taxes being introduced, it is pretty straightforward and thereby easy actually to navigate. With this having been said, I would like to hand over to you, Diego, again. Maybe there are some questions for us that we're happy to discuss with you, with Andreas. And in the meantime, thank you very much again for having us. And I hope we could address a lot of the points that are interesting for the audience.
First of all, thank you both so much, Constantin and Andreas. I think the audience will agree with me that this has been a truly amazing overview about relevant and important topics. Thank you for your sophisticated analysis. Thank you both so much for your insights. I think this was really, really helpful, and I can say that the Q&A here is going to take a while because we have a lot of questions and a lot of comments. So thank you, audience. Please continue to raise your questions and the topics that you want to discuss. We have the unique opportunity to have those two experts here with us. So let's bring the questions in, and I will just start, and then we will go through the individual points and individual discussions. First things first, one of the questions that comes a lot is this being recorded? Do we get the slides, but also the actual recording, so the voiceover? I can say yes, you will of course get both of them, so don't worry. You will be able to listen and see all that we have discussed again. The next point that I want to bring up here is that there seems to be a bit of a question mark about the difference between Abu Dhabi and Dubai. So I'm going to try to summarize a couple of questions here, but some listeners asked, we talked a lot about Abu Dhabi. What is the difference if I have a free zone company here with IFZA in Dubai, if I'm a resident in Dubai? To clarify again, Abu Dhabi, of course, is the capital of the UAE, but we have 7 different emirates. So at times we have different rules and regulations in different emirates, but I would like to hand over the questions to both of you. maybe where do you see similarities on a national level, but also some type of differences on depending on where, in which Emirates you are living and in which Emirates your company is based and is active?
So I think I would take that one. Thank you. Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think on a general note, one would need to understand that the country has 7 emirates, and I think we have over 45, more than 45 free zones in the UAE. So in total, we're talking about over 52 different jurisdictions where you can basically base your business. And we've seen now that you have that National Media Council that basically requires you to register your social media company or your freelance activities with the NMC. And on the Emirate level in Dubai, we do not have any other particular rules and regulations that pertain to the social media influencers, so to speak. In Abu Dhabi, it's a bit different. Abu Dhabi, as Diego just mentioned, is the capital of the United Arab Emirates and has its own jurisdictions also in the mainland. That's the Abu Dhabi Department of Economic Development. And they have released a circular which pertains to social media influencers. Now, this will only be applicable if you are actually based in Abu Dhabi. And as far as I know, I think also with regard to free zones in Abu Dhabi, such as Abu Dhabi Global Markets or KIZAD, but I don't think KIZAD would have any social media activities. I didn't check it, but I would be surprised. But in any case, if you would be in Dubai, based out of Dubai through a mainland company or a free zone such as IFZA or other free zones, these Abu Dhabi rules would not be relevant to you as long as you're actually conducting your business from Dubai. Now, conducting business always is a bit tricky question, right? Because what do? Ultimately, you post. Ultimately, you try to create content to have more followers. You would then also try to influence those followers in order to maybe buy a service from some of your business partners, maybe buy products of your business partners. And that's something that is basically very, very digital. So it's really the question, where do you sit in terms of providing such services? And if you're in the Emirate of Dubai and you basically have your mainland entity and you sit in that mainland company, then the Abu Dhabi rules would not be relevant for you. Diego.
Thank you so much. I hope this clarifies. I want to again summarize a couple of the questions that are coming in, and it's about taxation matters. So it is, I think, for some of our viewers, still a bit confusing about the 90 days tax residency, the 180 days. There's a couple of questions about that. I'm just going to quote here, very confusing about 90 days for tax residents. Please clear up about people who are here only for 90 days. We have other people who mention, if I stay in the UAE for 90 days, can I get the tax registration certificate to avoid double tax in my home country? We have people who stay here. I'm staying longer than 180 days. So maybe, I know you touched base on this, but if you could summarize this again once more, that I think would be helpful for the audience. Yeah.
There it is.
Yeah. There it is.
Okay, so generally speaking, there's 3 different thresholds, if you will. One is the easy one. You live here, you work here, you have your center of life here, then you're a tax resident. If you spent more than half a year here, so as to speak 182 days, even though you spend the rest of the year somewhere else, you may also be considered a tax resident. So these 2 issues are relatively identical. The different part is when you spend less than 182 days within a consecutive 12 months in the UAE, then, but more than 90 days. If you spend less than 90 days here, then you're definitely not a tax resident and you cannot become one. If you spend more than 90 days, but less than 182 days, then it might be that you become a tax resident here, but only if certain additional factors apply. These additional factors apply, however, to a very relatively small group of people, I would say, because it applies only to people who have an Emirates ID, so basically who are registered as residents here, or who are UAE nationals or GCC nationals. Only to these people does this rule apply. If you are from a European country, for instance, or from India, and you don't have a UAE a residency card, then this question doesn't even apply to you. And even if you are a UAE national, then still you need a third requirement to be fulfilled in order to then be considered a tax resident in the UAE, and that is basically to have a business here or to have a job here. If all of these, or if one of these factors do not apply, then you're not a tax resident here. So basically, for most people, the question comes up 182 days or more, then you can be considered a tax resident here. If less than 182 days, only under very slim circumstances can you be considered a tax resident. But I mean, these slides will be circulated as well, so you can check it out again with a little bit more time on your hand.
Great, thank you so much. I hope that clarifies. And again, let me just reiterate: we will, of course, share the content with you. So even though that sounds potentially a little bit complicated, I'm sure with the additional information you got here, you will be able to hopefully figure out more about yourself. I want to focus the topic a little bit on a different conversation. A lot of people are actually talking about LinkedIn. And I think, again, I'm trying to summarize here all the questions that are coming in about LinkedIn as to when are my activities on LinkedIn considered or falling under the influential law and when not, and do I need an MNC license for any activities that I do personally as well as through my corporate account on LinkedIn? When is that considered a part of the influencer law and when not?
Yeah, I think I mean, that's a very relevant question. What we see is that obviously NMC would like to have a wide catch in the sense that they would like to have a lot of companies, a lot of individuals to register. Now the big question is when is there sort of that strong obligation to register, and that really depends. I would say without any clear guidance on that issue from NMC being issued yet, so my advice would be if you really want to influence buyers' decision and you're advocating for a certain product with the aim of influencing your audience on whatever social media channel you're using. This can be LinkedIn, this can be Instagram, this can be Facebook, this can be any vehicle sort of that is available in terms of social media. You would need to check whether you apply with NMC. So if I would do something like that, I would probably go and register as an individual. I think the difficult point here really is that NMC really says it's not about sort of the object of making any profits, of making any money. And that basically creates an extremely sort of large scope and sort of a situation, and that's why all of these questions came, and I think it's a very relevant point, is as to when I really need to register with the NMC. But sort of in a nutshell, I would say if you are trying to influence a buyer of any product or a service, other than, let's say, on a one-time occasion, say, look, I've dealt with that service provider and I think they're really, really great, or I bought this soap and I think it's very, very great. By the way, I see on LinkedIn more and more of these posts. It's very, very funny because I thought it was a space that was going to be free of such posts, but it seems to be more getting into a Facebook, Instagram sort of arena. But jokes aside, then I would strongly recommend probably to register. As I've mentioned earlier, if you're an individual, then that will not have a financial impact for you. And then the question is, if you want to really do it a long time, meaning longer than 3 years, in the 4th year only, that would have a financial impact on you, and you could still sort of also decide to discontinue such activity, and thereby there is no further sort of obligation to basically keep being registered with the NMC. But again, having said this, it is a moving target. And because it's a moving target, I think everybody who is doing that really needs to regularly check the NMC's website, check the newspapers, potentially also consult with their local counsel or lawyer to see what is the newest development in this regard and what impact does it have on me. I assume that we will get more guidance from NMC on this issue, on this particular issue, because if you take a very, very conservative approach, that would mean basically all of us would need to register with NMC, and I don't think that that's what they really, really want. So it's a bit of a tricky answer here, Diego.
Yeah. I mean, I see that also in the questions that are coming in. There's a lot of people asking similar questions. Some users are using LinkedIn, others are using YouTube and other channels, right? And nowadays every brand is somewhat active on all sorts of social media channels. So I think it is vague, and therefore consultation is certainly important. That is something that we would recommend to everyone. Seek counsel before you become active and see as to what extent you should get involved with yourself as well as with your company. I want to say also a big thank you to both of you. I see and read that a lot. So obviously a lot of people are grateful for your insights. So I want to share this with you as well, of course. There is a question from someone who would like to seek counsel also from the two of you. And how would that work? And is it payable? So maybe you can also once again highlight how they are able to contact you, where you are reachable, and also provide a bit of about your services that you can provide also individually, not only on the webinar here.
So I mean, we're going to share the slides through you. All of our contact details are shared on the last I think 2 or 3 slides. There, our email addresses are included, and our phone numbers are included. So what we do at emltc, we take a holistic approach. We will look at everything always from a tax, but also from a legal sort of perspective. And depending on the requirements, we're happy to give you sort of a tailor-made quotation. When we can, we're happy to agree on a flat fee that creates cost transparency on both ends. And if that's not the case, we would work on hourly basis, and then it depends on the size of the business.
Yeah, and also the complexity of the question.
Correct.
So it depends on the individual case, but generally speaking, there's oftentimes the possibility to find a solution.
Absolutely.
And I think we will share again your contact later
Yes.
on. We have that in the slide deck as well, so we'll definitely make sure you get the contact as well. So Andreas and Constantin can be contacted by all of you if you see need. The next question, I'm just going to quote this because it's a rather long sentence. If an influencer is invited to a different country by tourism boards, which usually includes travel costs, hotel, food, etc., does they have to attract tax on such transactions, or do we even have to register as an influencer license for such cases? It's a very specific case, but maybe you can talk a little more about the travel content creators and what that means under UAE law.
Maybe I'll talk about the permit sort of and license aspect. So I think what's always very important is as foreigners, typically we're not allowed to work in other countries. There's obviously certain exceptions if you're European and you're traveling and moving around in Europe. But let's say you're an Indian national, you have your company here in the UAE, and then you're going to be invited, let's say, to France by a board of tourism, and as it was mentioned in that question, you would be paid and everything, or we would be paid in kind, so to speak. Everything is paid for. The question is it taxable, and where is it taxable? Actually, that's sort of the first question. Andreas will touch upon that. I think what's also very important is always to keep in mind you will need typically a work permit in any country where you're conducting such services on the ground. And this is something that is obviously quite relevant to any industry. Typically, we have this question always when we consult our big companies that would build machinery. And there's always a part where, let's say, one specialist would need to fly in from abroad to sort of commission this machine or to repair it, to fix it. and these guys might not have a work permit. They might just, you know, jump on the plane and have some spare parts in their backpack and repair that machine in the target country with a tourist visa. And that's something you need to check. That's actually typically illegal. In particular, in the Gulf countries, they're quite strict on these things. And the thing with social media then always is, obviously you're gonna record everything. You're gonna put it online. You're gonna make a video. You're gonna basically say, hey, look, I'm here in whatever Riyadh. Look, I'm here in whatever Doha, and so forth. And you're basically documenting that you're carrying out a service while you are under a tourist visa. It's sort of, you know, when you think about Facebook and you speak to kids and younger people and basically say, look, maybe it's not a good idea to post every picture on Facebook, because once it's in the internet, it's hard to get out. Sort of that idea. So that's one aspect. That is, it's not exactly the answer you're looking for the tax aspect, but it's always something that goes hand in hand when you basically branch out and you go abroad, even if it's just for a short period of time. I think on the tax end, Andreas, I would like you to address that.
Yeah, on the tax end, it really depends on the type of activity that you're then doing there. So if you're invited by the tourism board, and then you're taking part, for instance, in some events or something like that, then this might be not necessarily considered like online activities or social media activities, but rather entertainment activities, you know. And for these specific types of activities where people travel around the world, similar to sports, to professional athletes, for instance, you know, the tennis players, they play the Grand Slam in France, they play it then at Wimbledon, and then in the US, and everywhere where they're all making money off of it. And the question always is, where is that taxable? And the similar question, and it's a similar situation for people who get invited to provide a certain service outside of the of their own, let's say, home jurisdiction. And the general rule is, and that's often covered in double taxation agreements between the country of residence where you are and the country of destination where you're invited to. A general rule is that when that's considered entertainment, then usually it's tax exempt at your home country. In the UAE, for instance, it's 0%, and then it's taxed in the country wherever you are being paid for the service that you're providing. But that's a very that really depends on the type of activity that you're then conducting there.
Thank you very much. I think one advice is also to have a conversation with the tourism organization when it comes to the details there. Obviously, here we're aspecting mostly the UAE. But if you travel outside of the UAE, certainly makes sense to also have a conversation with local contacts that you do. By the way, I just want to highlight that we have just shown you also the contacts of the colleagues here, and we will do so also towards the end once again, so you will have the chance to also contact them after the webinar. I want to continue with another question that has been raised. And that is a very broad question. What is the difference between a free zone company and a mainland company? I know we covered both of them to some extent, right? And Constantin, you mentioned we have over 40 free zone companies in the UAE. So maybe if we could share a light again on the jurisdictions, as well as also some differences there, that'd be certainly helpful for the audience as well.
Sure, yeah, my pleasure. So, I mean, the general idea is that you have the 7 emirates that are mainland jurisdictions, and within those 7 emirates, you will have, over 45, I think, free zones that will be separate jurisdictions within one of these emirates. You have that separate sort of differentiation between the commercial free zones and the financial free zones. The DIFC, Dubai International Financial Free Zone, is one in Dubai, and the ADGM, Abu Dhabi Global Markets, is another one in Abu Dhabi. These two are quite distinct because they operate on a so-called common law framework, whereas all of the other free zones are basically subject to the laws and regulations of the UAE, which is a civil law jurisdiction. And they might have certain particular rules and regulation when it comes to the corporate law, also sometimes when it comes to rules and regulations pertaining to labor. But generally speaking, the idea is that if you're based out of a free zone, that you can only conduct business out of the geographical limits of the respective free zone. In other words, if you want to set up within IFZA, this is the Dubai Silicon Oasis free zone, you would need to be based out of here. However, you can export the services. So there's a big difference between basically providing a service in person and providing services that you can export, such as social media activities, whereby you're basically sitting in front of your computer, you're posting, you're basically creating content, and you put your ideas into social media content. So this can be conducted sort of out of the free zone and exported also to mainland customers. Let's say you have a mainland customer that provides, let's say, protein shakes or whatever, and you have that customer as a or that company as a customer. There's no issue of providing the services and exporting the services, so to speak, from a free zone into the mainland. For me, always the big differentiator is between free zone and mainland is that in the free zones, typically you will have a one-stop shop when it comes to commercial licensing. You would typically have somebody you can talk to about the commercial activities that you require. We've discussed this in the context of this webinar when I said sometimes companies for social media are being set up as management consultancies, which is not correct, but you can go and check with the sort of licensing authority, and then you basically do everything for you, the work permit. They might help you to find the lease, the office lease. In the mainland, that's a bit different. You would need to apply for a commercial license with the Departments of Economic Development, or in Dubai, it's called now Department for Economy and Tourism, DET. In Abu Dhabi, it's the Abu Dhabi Department of Economic Development. And then you need to basically open up files, let's say, with the Ministry of Human Resources and Amortization in order to get your a visa and work permit, and if you want to hire more staff, etc. But sort of the benefit I see with mainland companies is that you're a little bit more free in terms of office lease space, because you do not have that geographical limitation. But this having been said, it really depends on where you want to go with your social media enterprise, so to speak. If it's going to be a big show in terms of, employing people who are helping you on the technical side, video content creation, post content creation, etc., and you're going to need to hire a lot of people, then the mainland might be a good choice for you. But you can always check out the different free zones and the availability of office space and also the respective lease options. Historically, it was that sort of that unique selling point that you could have the 100% foreign ownership in the free zones. That was sort of liberalized throughout the last years, whereby the mainland basically allows, in particular in Dubai and Abu Dhabi, almost any commercial activity. Some of that you need to check with the respective authorities in the mainland, but generally speaking, the social media license or social media influencer activities, as far as I know, can be carried out 100% foreign owned in the mainland. So that historic sort of argument is no longer really valid. So the differentiator for me is, and that's why I always like free zones, we ourselves are set up in 2 free zones in the United Arab Emirates, is that you have that one-stop service provider aspect through the free zones. And that for me makes a big difference, because it basically lowers the administrative hurdles.
Yeah. One thing that I would like to add perhaps is, like I said, the one-stop shop aspect is very important. In the mainland, you're a bit on your own, basically, whereas here you have guidance through entities such as IFZA. Sorry. The other aspect, obviously, is that at least in certain free zones and in certain circumstances and types of business, you might be eligible for a 0% taxation. So if you're what's called a qualified free zone person, then all of your income that's generated as qualified income is then tax-free, irrespective of the amount that you're actually making. This is not really relevant for an influencer seminar or webinar, if you will, because the types of activities that are that qualify as such activities are very limited, and don't really align with advertisement and these types of social media activities. But this is another important aspect,
no,
I think,
absolutely.
which is an advantage for the companies that are in free zones.
Yeah. I mean, those are the structures we're also currently sort of building up for some of the clients that have let's say, a regional distribution hub here. Yeah, but then you need to know exactly which free zone you can actually opt into, because you need a so-called designated zone. But as you mentioned, Andreas, for the purposes of social media, the sort of 0% tax regime has no meaning because it's not applicable. So this is really for other business cases that we're happy to discuss in another environment.
No, but I think you summarized it quite perfectly. Thank you for that. I just want to add maybe one more aspect on my end when it comes to the differences, as you mentioned it. I always say it heavily depends on the business that you want to conduct here. We obviously advise you what best to do. All free zones in the UAE have their specific area that they focus on, their specific market, their specific segment that they focus on, and same goes for mainland. Yeah. When it comes to the one-stop shop that you mentioned before, I absolutely agree with you. I would just add to this. It's also that a free zone such as IFZA is also a full service provider. So as you can see in the conversation that we're having today, the discussion obviously or the ramification when it comes to a setup process here in the UAE has changed, and it becomes a little more sophisticated to do that. And so with that, there is also the idea of, are there additional services that we provide? And that is given by a free zone. So IFZA, for example, today, we're not only providing the idea of a license and as visas, but we also help you to navigate through complicated matters as such. Yeah, we give support when it comes to your bookkeeping. We give support when it comes to your corporate tax registration. We provide obviously solutions when it comes to bank account opening, corporate bank account opening. So you're sort of in a protected environment when you are decide to go for a free zone company, and not only are you dealing with a one-stop provider, but more often also with a full service provider. Yeah, and that I think is ultimately beneficial for a lot of you. But at the same time, there are valuable reasons why somebody would like to open a mainland company, as you have just elaborated as well. So it heavily depends always on the business, on your ideas, on your goals here in the UAE, and what you want to achieve with the company as well. I think we're slowly coming to an end. I just want to add another question that has been raised here. I'm going to quote this as well, if you don't mind. On UAE government website, to get a tax residency certificate, it is stated to provide proof of permanent place of residence. But that is not mentioned on the requirements on your slide. So can you clarify?
That is more of a technical question, or more of a question of evidence rather than a question of fact. So when you're you don't become a resident by receiving the tax residency certificate. That tax residency certificate is a document of proof, just a piece of evidence basically, when it comes to the question of double taxation in your homeland. So in that sense, it's a piece of evidence. And of course, for somebody else, in that case the UAE government, to actually give you that evidence and provide you with that, they in turn also need proof from your end that you're actually located here. Because obviously many things are tracked here, but not everything, and therefore for them it is important to understand how much time have you actually spent here? What are you doing here? Is your family living here? Are your kids going to school here? These types of things. And if you're able to provide this type of evidence, obviously the evidence available that you have at your hand depends on your individual circumstances and your individual situation. But if you have a rental contract which goes for over a year, if you earn a salary here, if, like I said, your kids go to school here, these types of things, then this is good a good indicator for you to provide in order that you actually are a resident here and that you actually stay here.
Very good. Thank you so much for this. And with that, I think we are slowly coming to an end. I see there has just been one more question that just popped in. Or it's actually more a comment, which I'm happy to read out loud. We have a company registered with IFZA. Also, my booking accountant, such a good experience, great professional, and excellent assistance to register the corporate tax. So thank you so much for that. I think this is exactly what we discussed before. We want to provide extra services to our clients. Therefore, we also collaborate with excellent partners such as Constantin and Andreas to give you the full service to make sure that you get the understanding and the support that you need to open a company here in the UAE, a profit from this prosperous location here, and really have a fantastic start here in this country. So I would like to slowly come to an end, but not before also to mention that you can, of course, contact all three of us. You have seen the contact details for Andreas and for Constantin. The team is showing it again here, so please feel free to reach out to them if you have any further assistance that you need in terms of taxation, legal requirements, or any other topics that you would like to cover with them. And then also we would like to highlight our contacts again with IFZA. If you are interested in finding out more about the opportunities that IFZA gives, if you are interested in incorporating a company with us, please feel free to reach out. You have the QR code with the website. You have the contact details here. I just want to mention again that this webinar has been conducted in English, of course, but we have multiple languages that we speak here. All three of us on stage, we actually speak German. We have a larger German-speaking team here at IFZA, but we also have many other languages that we speak. Not only do we have the language barrier that we can cover here, but also, of course, oftentimes we can give you specific information about certain criteria when it comes to your home country. So please feel to reach out if you are interested. With that, I think we're slowly coming to an end. I would like to thank both of you once again very much for your great insights. Thank you for being here today. I would like to thank everyone behind the camera that have done such an amazing job to host this webinar. I think we are live for 1.5 hours, which I believe is almost a new record here. So obviously a lot of interest, which is really great. And last but not least, I want to thank every one of you who joined in today. Thank you for your active participation, and I'm really looking forward to hear and see you very soon here in Dubai. And with that, I wish you a lovely evening. Thank you all so much, and talk to you soon and see you soon. Goodbye from Dubai. Thank you.